Many fans interpret the Force as a system that functions like a superpower hierarchy, where training unlocks new abilities and characters progress through tiers of strength. However, the original films present the Force as a state of alignment rather than capability. Obi-Wan describes the Force as something that flows through all living things, not as a measurable power level. The focus is connection, not escalation. When the Force is treated like a skill tree, viewers expect that training automatically produces new techniques, yet early storytelling consistently shows that technique without clarity yields no transformation. Lifting objects or using influence is not tied to talent, but to intention. Luke lifting the X-Wing is framed not as achieving a higher level, but as finally removing doubt the barrier was internal, not mechanical. Another widespread misunderstanding is the belief that the Force belongs only to Jedi or Sith. This interpretation comes from associating robes, lightsabers, and temples with exclusivity. Institutions teach discipline, but they do not own connection. Characters, such as Maz Kanata and Chirrut Imwe, demonstrate a consistent relationship with the Force without belonging to either order, and their understanding is not based on rank. Even the Night Sisters illustrate Force sensitivity outside of traditional categories. Their abilities come from belief culture and tradition, not from Jedi training. The existence of multiple methodologies across the galaxy reveals that the Force does not require institutional certification. If anything, institutions limit interpretation rather than expand it. The Force remains broader than any doctrine. The assumption that strength determines outcome overlooks how Star Wars defines failure. Anakin has extraordinary potential, yet collapses when driven by fear. The issue is not power capacity, but intention. Yoda indicates that clarity and discipline matter more than raw ability. When Anakin prioritizes control over alignment, the Force does not support his decisions. The determining factor is purpose, not potential. Midichlorians are often misunderstood as a numerical measurement of power, when their narrative purpose is to illustrate connection sensitivity does not equal superiority. High potential still requires discipline. Without discipline, ability does not create outcome power. Without clarity leads to imbalance, and imbalance results in collapse. The Force measures alignment, not quantity. There is also a common belief that emotion blocks the Force. This interpretation usually comes from surface reading of Jedi teachings about detachment. However, the Jedi instruction does not prohibit feeling. It prohibits reaction based on uncontrolled attachment. Emotion is information. Attachment becomes a problem only when it drives action without reason. The barrier is loss of control, not feeling itself. Characters who achieve clarity do so not by suppressing emotion, but by processing emotion correctly. Serenity produces precision, and precision allows alignment when emotion fuels confusion. The Force becomes harder to access, not because the feeling is wrong, but because the focus is scattered. The Force requires awareness more than suppression. Another misconception is that decision makers can control the Force to produce desired results. This suggests the Force is a tool, yet every foundational text frames the Force as a current that individuals join, not a mechanism they manipulate. When users treat the Force as leverage, they lose connection because intention shifts from alignment to domination. Control contradicts harmony. The Sith seek to command the Force to impose personal will, which creates imbalance. The Jedi attempt to guide outcomes according to doctrine, which also disrupts natural alignment. In both cases, the Force is approached as something to use instead of something to understand. Balance requires responding to the Force, not directing it. The Force resists being turned into a strategy tool, because strategy implies ownership. Characters who try to manage the Force as if it were a resource consistently experience failure. The Force is not an instrument. It is a direction. The user follows. Insight flows through surrender, not assertion. The misunderstanding of the Force originates from treating it like a power system, rather than a relationship between intention, awareness, and action. The Force does not operate according to strength, institution, or ability. It operates according to clarity, alignment, and surrender. The less someone tries to command the Force, the more they can perceive it. The Force functions as a mirror rather than a ladder. It reflects inner state rather than granting external advantage. When Luke enters the cave on Dagobah, the outcome is not training but revelation. The Force presents the consequence of his fear. Not an enemy to defeat this scene, clarifies that the Force exposes internal truth rather than generating power. Because the Force reveals rather than grants, a user cannot hide intention. Technique does not overcome misalignment. If someone approaches with aggression, the Force amplifies aggression. If someone approaches with clarity, the Force amplifies clarity. The result is not chosen by ability, but by purpose. Characters learn that the Force illuminates what they already carry. The Force responds to intention more than technique. Qui-Gon consistently emphasizes that connection comes from belief, patience, and observation, rather than technical mastery of combat forms. He engages the Force through awareness rather than through effort, making him effective in situations where others would rely on strength-measured outcomes, arise from measured intention. Meditation in Star Wars is not used to increase power. It is used to remove interference from thought. When interference disappears, the path becomes clear. This reveals that the Force does not reward effort. It responds to alignment. Effort without clarity produces confusion. Clarity without forceful effort produces direction. The Force favors stillness over force. Balance in the Force is frequently misinterpreted as a scale that requires equal dark and light representation. Balance refers to preventing domination from either side. The Force becomes unbalanced when someone attempts to impose destiny. Whether it is the Sith through control or the Jedi through restrictive doctrine, balance requires that the Force flow without obstruction. The Jedi believe that restraint maintains balance, and the Sith believe that dominance creates strength. Both perspectives misread balance as something that must be managed instead of something that occurs naturally. When ego or doctrine attempts to steer the Force, imbalance appears. The Force corrects intrusion by shifting outcomes toward equilibrium. The Force does not prioritize strength. It prioritizes harmony. Pivotal moments in the saga show that the greatest demonstrations of the Force occur when characters release control, not when they exert it. Luke throws aside his lightsaber and removes himself from violence. Ahsoka ceases fighting to resolve internal conflict, and alignment produces clarity. Violence does not grant victory. Alignment does. Characters win, not by overpowering an opponent, but by aligning with the Force to bring resolution. The Force moves around action, not through it. And when characters stop trying to dominate the outcome, the Force enables a result that would not have been possible through strength. The Force adapts to individuals rather than individuals adapting to the Force. Luke reaches it through belief, Kanan through responsibility, Rey through intuition, and Chirrut through faith. Each connection demonstrates a different lens. None are incorrect. The Force shapes itself to personal truth, because clarity is personal, not universal. Because the Force molds itself to the individual, a rigid training doctrine limits rather than empowers. Jedi instruction creates discipline, but can prevent discovery if the doctrine becomes the objective, instead of the Force itself. This shows that institutions can obscure the very thing they exist. To teach, the Force operates outside structure. Characters succeed with the Force when they stop trying to predict or engineer outcomes and begin to perceive the present moment. Awareness determines direction. The Force is not a reward for mastery. It is the result of alignment. That alignment manifests through listening rather than demanding. The Force is personal, decentralized and reflective. It does not measure strength, institution, or technique. It reveals truth, guides intention, and responds to alignment. Characters who stop trying to use the Force begin to understand it. Characters who try to control it lose connection. The Force is understood not through power but through perception. But
thank you for watching. Be sure to like, subscribe, and hit that share button. My main channel is Critical Analysis Hub, where I post Star Wars content about the movies. My secondary channel is Critical Analysis Hub Plus, where I focus on the shows of Star Wars. And my third channel is Critical Analysis Hub XP, where I post comic books. Be sure to take a moment and check them out. Thanks, and may the Force be with you.